So far, what does our app do? We are trying to persist data to our application or to the device. So currently, if I have kilometers selected and I stop my application from running and I run it again, and I go to settings, kilometers does not persist. It does not save to the device or the simulator, right? It does not save. We want to be able to save it. How can we save it? We'll use UserDefaults. UserDefaults is the ideal candidate for this. UserDefaults allows us to save simple data types. I've seen applications where UserDefaults saves more complex objects than it needs to, but part of the reason why you don't want to save complex objects in UserDefaults, everything gets loaded when the application loads. So the more objects you have in that dictionary there of UserDefaults, the slower your application will be, right? So you want to keep it as simple as possible so that your application does not take X amount of seconds more than it needs to run, right? The worst user experience is when your app takes forever to load. Nobody is crazy about that, right? Cool. So let's go back to our user preferences wrapper. So again, we wrote this wrapper according to Matt. Matt said we'll write a wrapper to wrap our user defaults objects so that we're not writing that same logic throughout our application. Right now, we have only 2 view controllers. What if we have 10 view controllers? Are we going to write that same logic everywhere? No. We're going to create some sort of singleton, or we'll inject, using dependency injection, some sort of user preferences. But today, we're using singleton, and we'll have a function to say, set or update this value, or get me the current value. So what does that value look like? Let's go back to our settings view controller. And right now, that wrapper we just wrote, the wrapper we wrote, we'll actually take that enum over to the wrapper we just wrote. So the wrapper we just wrote, or the user preferences, we'll go ahead and take this particular enum, take it out of here, and put it in our user preferences class right here. Okay. So now it owns everything. That file owns everything. So we have our user preferences. Great. What do we want to do here? We'll write a function to update unit measurement. And we also need a function to get unit measurement. Okay? And for the get unit measurement, what we want here is a unit measurement. It might be optional, does not exist. And update unit measurement, we have one argument here. So update unit measurement with unit measurement. Okay? Yes, sir. Because right now, when we started, we only had the one settings view controller, correct? But now we've created this class called user preferences, and user preferences should be the one to have that enum in the file there, and also any other enum we have, that particular user preference is the one working with the unit measurement now. No longer is unit measurement tied in with the settings view controller. Unit measurement is tied in with or coupled with the user preferences. Okay, so here, update unit measurement, this is how we'll be setting a default. So this method will set a user defaults value or object. And this particular method will retrieve a user defaults value or object. Okay, so set user defaults, great. So we have a unit of measurement here, great. What do we want to do? We want to actually set that value to user defaults. In user defaults, we have, let's actually create, instead of doing user defaults that's shared all the time, let's create standard equal to user defaults that's standard, right? So instead of writing user defaults that's standard every time, we create some sort of constant here called standard. So we simply just say standard. Everybody with me? Okay. Great. So here, what do we want to do? We want to set it. So we simply say standard dot set. Keep in mind, you could use any of those, by the way. It doesn't have to be a URL here when you see the drop down. So those are all the values that's compatible with property list. So this is a property list, URL, any object, Boolean, double, float, int. But keep in mind, it doesn't have to be like, for now, we're about to set a string. I don't have to go down to string. I could simply just grab any one here. So the value is going to be unit.raw value, that's a string. And the key, we need a key. We need some sort of key to call the value, or the way we get back the value, we need some sort of key. If you look back at the lesson, if we look back at our lesson here, so to store it, you need a key, right? To store some value, you need a key. To retrieve that same value, you need a key. So what are we gonna do? Are we gonna keep using a literal string? No, we're not gonna keep using a literal string. When I say a literal string, I'm talking about open quotations, some name, close quotations. That's a literal string. What happens? We know what could go wrong. If I use a literal string, the simple place I mistype it, my app won't act as normal. So anytime you're using a literal string, stop yourself from using this literal string, take a step back, and go create some sort of enum or struct, whatever you want to create, some constant to access that string. So right in our file again, everything here is owned by user preference. Right here, we'll create a struct, and we'll call it user preference key. And right now, we only have one key, so we'll say let unit measurement equal to unit measurement. Okay? So now there's no developer error. If I use this user preference key dot unit measurement, it's a constant. I am not using a literal anymore. I only have a literal one place. Where do I have that literal? Right here in the definition. I'm not writing that literal everywhere in my app. Avoid doing that. Even if you're like, oh, it's only one key. The minute you add more keys, it will become harder to debug. You'll have crashes, not crashes. You'll have logic errors. Like, hey, I saved this data, but I cannot retrieve that data. So for example, if you have literals everywhere in your code, and you name something Swift here, someplace else you probably have Swift with an extra space. That's not the same value, okay? So avoid doing that. So now our key, the way we access our key is user preference key dot unit measurement, okay? So avoid string literals when it comes to keys. So what is this line of code doing on 32? This line of code on 32 is actually adding this value to my user defaults. Line 32 is the heart of the lecture. This is storing or persisting the unit measurement value to user defaults. And here I'll put device or simulator. And I'll say as permanent storage. I'll say as permanent storage. Why am I saying that? The only reason why that value won't be available anymore is if you override the value or if the user deletes the application, okay? If we delete the app from the Springboard and we relaunch the app, user value, user defaults is gone. That's why when you're about to delete an app, Apple tells you documents and data will be lost or will be deleted, okay? That includes your documents directory, that includes your user defaults, okay? So that's why I say permanent storage here. Unless the user explicitly deletes the app or they override the value, that value exists.
Is the user preference key
Yes. Just build. Command B. Okay, so user preference key, that's good. So this is setting, right, guys? This is setting, this is storing, right? You have an empty bucket. I take the the unit measurements, I put it in that bucket, in that dictionary. That dictionary is user defaults. Okay? Yes, yes, exactly. So it's a dictionary. Again, user defaults is a dictionary. My dictionary starts off being empty. And I store a value in my dictionary. I have a key, I have a value. Okay? The key is called unit measurement. The value is either miles or kilometers. Everybody. Let me actually write that down because sometimes we do catch ourselves thinking user defaults is this more complex data type. It's a simple data type, it's a dictionary. You store things by setting them. You retrieve things by getting them out of the dictionary using optional binding, okay? So here, our key is unit measurement, and our value is either miles or kilometers. And I say it's a dictionary, so it could look something like this, where you have key value, okay? Everybody? So this is our dictionary here. This is what user defaults looks like. User defaults. So you start off by this being empty. If it's empty, the result for unit measurement will be nil, correct? Correct? So if this is empty, nothing exists. I run the app for the first time, nothing exists in user defaults. The user selects or selects a default that's not miles. It will now have a value of kilometers. $26? That line is saying instead of typing out user defaults all the time, I simply type out standard, that's it. That's a singleton. Let me actually take that line off. I'll take that line out because I don't want us to rely on this standard for now. I mean, yes, know that you could do it, but for now, let's keep this user defaults, that standard. Even if we're going to type it out again, that's fine. So user defaults, that standard is a singleton. Very similar to our own singleton here. User defaults, that standard, one instance exists in my application. Okay? User defaults, that standard is a singleton. Let's actually write that out. User defaults, that standard is a singleton in iOS that gives us access to saving and retrieving stored data. I know we've done a lot of code, but keep in mind, if I want to store user defaults, this is the one line I need. If I'm storing one piece of data, this is the one line I need to write to that dictionary. User defaults, that standard, that set, the object you set in. Okay? Yes?
I thought you made an instance.
I removed the standard. I don't want to take out too many, I don't want to abstract too many things. Because when we come back, people are going to be, what's that standard or what is this? So I write out user defaults, that standard. But as you're more comfortable with it, know that instead of saying user defaults as standard, you could have a constant called standard, okay? But for now, I want to keep everything raw as possible. So I want to come back to this app later today or in the future. We know it's user defaults that standard, okay? Great. So now we added two user defaults. How do we remove? Okay? So let's remove now. So let's remove. And I said it's a dictionary. I said we're going to use optional binding. So what's the syntax for that look like, Yulia? Retrieve. How do I access a dictionary, Yulia, using optional binding? If let, right? And here I'm going to use user defaults. That's standard. This is the dictionary, right? This is our dictionary. It's called user defaults. That's standard. It's built into iOS. And object for key. Object for key. I'm about to access I'm looking for some value for some key. I have the key, I know what the key is, but I don't know what the value is. Again, this is dictionary syntax. Dictionary syntax, if let some value, here we'll call it unit measurement. Okay? For key, our key is user preference key dot unit measurement. At this point, what's the data type of unit measurement? Is it a string? It's a string, right? So May says this is a string. Do we all agree? Do you agree? What data type is it? Is it a string? Is it any? What data type is unit measurement? Right now, as is.
Option click is any.
What's that?
Option click is any.
When your option click is any, right? But if you ask the question and you don't have option click at your disposal, know that it's any. Why is it any? Because that particular user defaults, it stores any value. You have to tell it what type of value you expect. You have to use typecasting to say, hey, I expect back a string, or I expect back an int, or I expect back an array of strings. Okay? You stored it, you should know what value you're expecting out of it. Over here, we stored it as a string, right? This here is what? That's a string, correct? Unit.raw value is a string. So we expect back a string, we have to typecast it as a string. If we don't typecast it, keep in mind that it's any. So if you option click on unit measurement, it's of type any. Okay? If I don't optionally bind it, it's going to be type any optional. Okay? All right, great. So what do we need to do here, Christian?
You went to typecast string.
How do I typecast it? What's the syntax? Right? Now, if I option click on it, now it's a string. Cool? Perfect. So now let's go ahead and return that value. I'll simply return unit measurement, raw value, unit measurement. Oh, haha. If I want to access unit measurement here, what do I need to do? A guard, right, Cassandra? Cassandra says if we need to access unit measurement outside of that if statement, we need to change if to a guard. Does everybody agree? Does everybody agree? There's a fundamental difference there between a guard and an if let. Everybody with me? Right? Same optional binding, but here the guard statement will have access to the value outside of the if statement. Right now, we do not have access to unit measurement. Do you agree, Luba? Okay, so we need to say guard here. Change this to guard. And make an else here. And we'll return. What's a good value to return here? If we do not have a value, what do we want to return? If I don't have a value on line 44, what should I return? Nil, according to May. Shania, do you agree? Nil. Why nil? Because this is optional. If there's no value, I simply return nil. Okay? Great. So we are done with that. We could go test it out. So remember to set, all we need to do is UserDefault standard.set, right? And that's the syntax, that's the value you do, the function you call. To retrieve the value, I use optional unwrapping, or optional binding, rather, sorry. UserDefaults is the dictionary. The key that you're interested in, that's all you need. And remember to typecast it to the value you expect. Okay? Let's go over to our settings controller, and let's continue on. Update value in UserDefaults. Okay. Before we do anything, run your app and make sure it still works as normal, because we moved some code around. Click on settings, still be able to toggle, yes? You could still toggle, correct? Everything still works? Okay, let's continue on. So update value in UserDefaults. How are we going to do that? So anytime I change the current unit, I want to set the value. So now we have our wrapper. It's called user preference. So on user preference.shared, I have an update unit function. And here I simply pass in current unit. Right? So this adds that value to UserDefaults with the function we just wrote. We wrote a function called update unit measurement. So right now we could store the information. But how do we retrieve the information? We have a function to also retrieve the information. Where is a good place to retrieve that information? You're writing that app out, where's a good place to retrieve that information? Where would you write it? View.load is a good place to start. Thank you, sir. So here I'll simply say update UI. And I'll write an update UI function. Private function update UI. And as Greg is saying, this is a good place to do it because when my app loads, I want to update the UI. Okay. So first, let's go ahead and retrieve any defaults in UserDefaults, any values rather, as needed. Okay. So we start off with an if-let, because we know it's optional by the signature we wrote. And we have user preferences dot shared dot get unit measurement. And this is unit measurement. And unit measurement is the exact type we need. It's of type unit measurement, which is perfect. Because all we have to do now is say current unit equal to unit measurement, like that. So in our view.load, our view comes on screen. It looks in our user preference wrapper to see if there is a measurement that was stored. If there was a measurement that was stored, we get that measurement back, and we assign that measurement to current unit. And current unit has a did set on it. On the did set, we'll update the label. Okay, let's go ahead and test that out. So I go to settings. That is actually working already because the first time we ran it. So change it to miles here. Stop the application. Run the application again. It should be on miles. It's on miles, okay? I stop the app again, just to confirm. It still says miles. At this point, I went to Europe. I want to go to kilometers. I change it to kilometers. I stop the app. I run the app again. Go to my settings. That did not work. Let's see what's happening here. What did I do? Let me just verify. Change it to kilometers. Stop the app. Go to settings. What did we change? Kilometers? I have a value. It is kilometers. Change it to miles. Stop the app again. Run the app again. Go to settings. I have a value, and it's miles. I don't know, maybe I mistook something there earlier. Does it work for everybody as advertised here? Okay. We'll start off with one more, and then I'll let you go ahead and finish it. Okay? So we'll add some sort of image, and then you guys will go ahead and complete the challenge to making that image persist. Yes, sir. My user preference key. User preference key. This guy? That's what exactly are you looking for? Okay, cool. All right, so let's set up our table view and then you'll continue on. So our table view, let's go back to our storyboard. Go back to our storyboard. Go to our settings scene. Go to storyboard, settings scene. Click on table view section. Go to attributes inspector. Bless you. Are we all in attributes inspector? We all have one row currently, correct? Let's change it to 2 rows. So increase that number to 2. So anytime you increase, it duplicates what's above. Okay? So let's go ahead and edit that. So we want 2 rows, but we don't want 2 rows to say unit measurement. So let's edit this. Go to your documents outline. Click on the section. Click on the table view cell. Open up the content view. Delete the label that says unit measurement. And delete the label that says miles here. And our cell, we want our cell to have an image. So we'll make our cell bigger. Go to the size inspector for the cell. Click on your cell. Click on your second cell. Go to the size inspector. And toggle where it says, do we see where it says row height? Do we see where it says row height? Toggle the row height here and change it to, say, 300 points. Change it to 300 points. So right now we have a cell that's 300 points high. Next, let's add assets. Go to your assets folder. I shared some assets with us in Slack. So go ahead and add those assets. I added some assets in Slack. So go ahead and add those assets here. Import, desktop. What's that?
How do I increase the height myself?
You click on the cell, you go to size inspector,
Yeah.
you toggle the row height.
Okay, so just that.
No, that's fine.
And you want to make it 300?
Yeah. Make sure you add your assets. We have 2 assets. One says bike, one says run. Yes? Do we all have the assets? Yeah. Okay. Question? Click on the box that says, 1 second, let me go back to it. Click on the cell where it says automatic. Do you see that? Uncheck automatic on your cell. So use the document outline, guys. It's easier to work with than trying to actually click on the cell in the scene. So make sure you have your document outline open when you're doing those configurations. Okay, so we have our image. Let's drag in an image view. Image view, image view, image view. So drag in an image view and set the constraints to 0 throughout, right, the cell. So click on your image view and set the constraints for it. So 0 top, 0 lead-in, 0 trailing, and 0 bottom. So those are 4 constraints. 4 constraints. Go to the attributes inspector and change the image to, where's my image? To bike, for example, here. Okay, run the app. Let's run and make sure our image renders correctly. Okay, so very similar to what we did earlier. As I click on kilometers, for example, the challenge for you now will be to click on the image. It changes from bike to run, so that by default I have bike workouts or run workouts, whatever the user wants. And when I leave the app, it should persist that image. But we're not persisting the image. What we're persisting is a string. For example, bike or run. Everybody with me? Everybody with me? Any questions? So for the remainder, we have like 40 minutes. We'll be able to work on that challenge. Cool. So when I click on, whatever I click on here, it should persist. So if I change the bike to a run image, it should persist when I come back to the application. Okay? Any questions? Yes? Okay. Yes, sir.
So with what we have now, should our strings be persistent?
Yeah, the strings, yeah. The strings. Cool? Any other questions? So keep in mind, we had like an hour to our lecture, but really and truly, user persistence or user defaults, user defaults, it only boils down to 3 lines of code with what you want to do. 1 line of code with when you want to save, 1 line of code. User defaults that standard, set that object. And that object you set, that value you set, needs to be some sort of property list, like a string, a Boolean, right? Those are valid types there. To save, 1 line of code. To retrieve, to read back from user defaults, how many lines of code we have there? You could make it 2, 3, 1. You could even use nil coalescing here, right? But what do we really have? We have a dictionary syntax, right? The dictionary syntax we've known from unit 1, this is what we use, right? So user defaults, when it's said and done, it's about 4 lines of code. To read and write, okay? Any questions about that? Beyond that, we saw table view controller because we haven't seen what that looks like. But in my opinion and many developers' opinion, the fastest way to set up some setting screen is to use table view controller, right? You see how easy it is to drag and do stuff with that table view controller. And you see it visually there, okay? All right, cool. So we'll stop here.